Broadcasting now. All right, folks, we're just giving everyone a few seconds to get logged in before we get started here. If you are already logged in, you can find some information in our chat about how to purchase tonight's featured books and how to get 15% off those books when you purchase within the next week. So look for that coupon code and that link to the book buy page in the chat. Good evening and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to host tonight's event celebrating Red Hen Press. Tonight's readings and discussion feature Red Hen authors Donna Hemans and Aimee Liu and will be moderated by Dr. Gale, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to everyone for making this happen and to all of you for showing up. Greenlight storefronts are currently closed, but our community is still here. And we're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now I just have a couple of housekeeping things. First, you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see or hear you. Your video and audio are not turned on. They can see your name over in our attendee list, and they'll be able to see your name when you comment in chat or ask questions in our audience Q&A. If you scroll over the bottom of your Zoom window, you'll see a couple of functions that we'll be using throughout the event. One of them is labeled chat. I'll be posting some information here about how you can buy the book, get 15% off, how you can ask questions and participate in the audience Q&A, but you can also comment in here as well. You can say hello to the authors, provide some applause or heart emojis after readings or at high points in the conversation. And you can comment to the authors or to your fellow attendees about what's being discussed. You'll also see an icon at the bottom of your Zoom window labeled Q&A. This is where we'll be pulling questions from during the audience Q&A portion towards the end of our event. You can type your questions in here at any point throughout tonight's conversation. And if you see someone else's question that you would really like to hear answered, you can go ahead and upvote that. And the questions with the most likes will float towards the top of our queue as we're pulling questions to ask Donna and Aimee. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video or audio versions on our website or social channels later on. And tonight's featured books, Tea by the Sea and Glorious Boy, are available for sale from greenlightbookstore.com. Though our stores are closed, we're working with our supplier warehouse for fast direct-to-home shipping, and if you're local to Brooklyn, we're also offering curbside pickup. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured books is a great way to show your support. And we're offering 15% off the featured books when you purchase them from Greenlight's website this week. Look for that coupon code in the chat. Our moderator for this evening, Dr. Gale, is co-founder and managing editor of Red Hen Press, editor of the Los Angeles Review, and she teaches in the low residency MFA program at the University of Nebraska in poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction, and in the Ashland, Ohio MFA program. She's the author of 7 books of poetry, including The Goldilocks Zone from the University of New Mexico Press in 2014, and Echo Light from Red Mountain in 2014, and 6 librettos, including Rio de Sangre, a libretto for an opera with composer Don Davis. Kate is going to introduce our featured authors, and then each author will start us off with a reading from their book. After that, they'll be talking with Kate and with all of you. Kate, please take it away.
We are so grateful to Greenlight for having us here with you. This is such a privilege. We were just talking before the event started about what a wonderful bookstore you are. And I can't wait to be back with you in person. I can't wait to be back in New York in person. I miss New York and I miss bookstores in New York. So many blessings on all of you who are in New York, and I hope that we will learn much from this experience about community and the different ways we can share community. And I hope we will all get through this together as we are doing tonight. So both of these books are very dear to my heart and very dear to all of us at Red Hen. These are both books that obviously as managing editor came to me. They were sent across the transom to me and I fell deeply in love with. Glorious Boy by Aimee Liu is an amazing story, a World War II novel that's sort of set on the fringes of World War II. And Aimee Liu will get to tell us more about that. And Donna Hemans' novel actually was sent to me while I was on vacation in Greece. I tend to not read any novels at all, acquiring novels while I'm on vacation. But it's strange that I was on an island when I read this story that starts on an island and fell madly in love with it. Weirdly, these are both strangely island stories. They're very much island stories about mothers who love their children. They both have that strange intersection. And I think when the audience hears pieces of these stories tonight and hears pieces of this conversation tonight, they'll see why we wanted these two authors to be part of this conversation tonight. So before I ramble on anymore and spoil any pieces of this story, let's start with a little bit of a reading here tonight with Donna Hemans with Tea by the Sea. Such a beautiful title, Donna Hemans.
Thanks, Kate. So I'll start by giving you just a very brief description of what the book is about. And so Tea by the Sea is, as Kate said, set in Jamaica and set partly in Brooklyn. And it's a story of a young mother who is searching for her child that was taken from her at birth. And it takes her 17 years to find where that child is. So the section I'm going to read actually takes place in year 17, and it's when she first discovers or has a strong clue as to where the child is. And also what you learn in the very first chapter of the story is that the child's father has taken the baby girl. Brooklyn, East 33rd Street. The air was a little bit cooler and smelled of rain. Plum polished windows, both the inner and outer sides of the glass with a crumpled newspaper and a mixture of vinegar, lime, and water. She whistled, thinking at the same time of the uselessness of her chore, polishing the exterior windows when rain had set up to fall. But she didn't stop, simply moved her arms like a wound-up doll powerless to stop itself. Behind Plum were her girls, Nia and Vivian, 7-year-old twins. One doing cartwheels, the other watching, both girls lingering really and waiting for Plum to finish and turn to them. They were clingy girls, or perhaps it was the other way. Plum was an overprotective mother, preferring to have her girls with her, underfoot, within reach. Except for work, she didn't leave them. All these years, she hadn't been able to shake the fear that her girls wouldn't be there when she returned. But they were there. Nia, the acrobatic one, contorting her body through the air, and Vivian, a quiet observer with a book on her lap, stealing glances at Nia. Nia took risks. Vivian weighed consequences. Together, the girls balanced each other, and often when Plum imagined them older, as teenagers, she saw Nia treating life like a tightrope and Vivian holding the net beneath her sister. Even if Alan had been home at that very moment, the girls would still have been nearby waiting for her to finish and turn to them. Nia stumbled and crashed, and Plum turned to see her sprawled on the hardwood between the coffee table and the couch, water from a cup pooling, magazines from the rack scattered on the ground like shattered glass, and the storage bench flipped over on its side. "You all right? Where did you hit? Did you hit your head?" Nia, giggling instead of talking, looked at her sister and the pool of water spreading fast toward the rug. Vivian laughed too, their laughter loud, uncontrollable. Plum moved her daughter's shoulders and arms, watching for a wince, waiting for a shiver of pain, but again got only uncontrollable giggles. Enough of the cartwheels. She was trying to flip onto the bench and back down, Vivian said. Enough. Plum hadn't heard their discussion at all, hadn't heard the usual, watch me. Plum shook her head, moved towards the spreading pool, newspaper in hand, and layered it on top of the water sheet by sheet, and drew her breath. It was a hiccup, really. She looked again, closer this time, back bent, water dripping from one half of the newsprint. She ripped the sheet in half, dropped the wet half to the floor, then moved toward the window, sheet in hand for a closer look in the natural light. Unmistakable, Lenworth. She hadn't forgotten the face, the half smile, the thick brows, the thin nose. Below the photo, a caption with his name and his title, Priest. Unmistakably him. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. I love the details of mothering. As a mother myself, I think I hovered between hovering and benign neglect. And I love that you have that hovering and benign neglect all in the same scene.
Right.
Also, I also remember very much window washing with newspaper and vinegar. I loved that detail.
Yeah.
So Aimee Liu, Glorious Boy, can you read us a little bit?
Sure, and I'll give you the thumbnail sketch on this book first. It is the story of a family living in a place called the Andaman Islands, which is an archipelago off the coast of Burma. And Claire and Shep arrive in 1936, well before the war begins. Claire's an aspiring anthropologist, and Shep has been assigned to become the civil surgeon, the doctor of the port. Port Blair is a penal colony started by the British for Indian freedom fighters, and it's sort of their Alcatraz on steroids for these political prisoners who live there. The rest of the islands are primal forest, and they are inhabited by waning tribes that have been there for over 60,000 years, indigenous peoples. And so the port is this kind of political, cultural melting pot of British and Europeans and Burmese and Indians from all over India and these indigenous people that came out of Africa 60,000 years ago. Totally fascinating place that has riveted me ever since I first heard about it. At the core of the story is that this couple arrives and they have a child named Ty, and he is a fascinating child who is brilliant but doesn't speak. And speech and communication and attunement are all huge part of this story. Communication, language, Claire's ability or desire to learn the language of her indigenous people, and then ultimately she has troubles communicating with her own son because he does not speak even when he's 4 years old. And that contributes to some friction in the family when the Japanese land or are coming, and Claire and Shep are being evacuated. And the young girl, Nyla, who is taking care of Ty, disappears with him on the eve of occupation, and the family is pulled apart. And that's what most of the story is about. But because I've been talking a lot lately, the last couple of weeks, about colonialization and the threads of this story that relate to what we've all been going through in this country, around the world, political upheaval. Oops, getting a feedback. Are you hearing that too? No?
No, not hearing anything.
Okay, all right, well, I'll keep going. At any rate, here we go, that's much better, thank you. Claire and Nyla, the young girl who is the daughter of the servants, have a very interesting bond, and Nyla relates to Ty once he's born. But in this first section, it's really Claire trying to connect with Nyla, and you'll see what I mean about language and communication here. Nyla is just about 8 in this scene, and Claire is in her early 20s, and they're getting acquainted. Claire invited Nyla to help shelve the library and was pleased to see the girl eagerly leafing through each book before placing it. She seemed particularly fascinated by the photographic plates in the Andaman Islanders. Apparently, she'd never encountered any native Andamanese herself, though one picture, she said, resembled the layabout Perubi in Aberdeen Bazaar. But, she added, Perubi at least is keeping his clothing on. Claire noted the disparagement in her voice. She wondered where it stemmed from. What is this book, Mem? It's the story of the people who lived in these islands before you or I or even your parents were born, Nyla. The people whose ancestors came here first. They still live in the interior, you know. Have you never seen any yourself? The naked people. There was that same disapproval, but this time flatly matter of fact. Claire asked, is that what you've been taught to call them? Nyla swayed her head back and forth like her father. She told Claire that everyone in Port Blair, Europeans and locals alike, viewed the naked people as pests because they were strange and dirty and ugly to see, uncivilized. When the British began to build Port Blair, they fought the largest of the tribes in the Battle of Aberdeen and nearly wiped out the great Andamanese entirely. Teacher Sen said the surviving forest people still raided settlements and plantations up north. And some of the most remote islands had tribes that were said to be cannibals. Most of the naked people still used spears and arrows, however, so they were no match for British guns. The girl wrinkled her nose at the picture of an Aboriginal couple seated rigidly, perhaps ritualistically, back to back and staring in opposite directions. They are not looking real. Eventually, Claire would deduce that Nyla's father himself had a grandmother from the forest, but she died before he was born, and he and his wife never mentioned her, instead instructing Nyla to say that she had Tamil ancestors, dark people from South India being racially preferable to the indigenous Andamanese, and local born, designating a class meaningfully distinct from native. Prejudice in British India, Claire would learn, was actively transferable and widely embraced. So that's sort of the context into which this story is unfolding. And I'll stop there. We can have more conversation about that.
Well, I thought I'd ask each of you a question that has been kind of weighing on me, partly because of everything that's been going on. I've been thinking about two great writers of our time, Toni Morrison and Marilynne Robinson. I sent both of you guys something Marilynne Robinson had written probably in preparation for her own novel's release this fall. I think her novel is called Jack. And both of them have written a lot about the idea that when civilization is collapsing or is in trouble, the people who take it in the shorts the most, they said this much better, of course, are the women and children, the people who take the brunt of civilization's collapse the most are women and children. So Amy, I'll taking your book first, when your mother ends up wanting to get her son back, she's separated from her son, but she has to wait for the permission and help of a group of men. And that group of men are busy fighting what we might call an unnecessary war or a necessary war. but they're busy fighting wars. And there's no way she can go off and rescue her son by herself. They have to fight their wars, and she's going to have to wait to get their help. And we can all picture those of us who are moms or aunts or have children in our lives that we like, that we love, that it seems as though nothing would make us want to stop from just going and finding that child. But she can't just go in a boat by herself. She's going to need some help. And so, you know, we live in an interdependent culture, and yet the needs of women and children are often not put first. And obviously you were thinking about that when you were writing this novel. When you look at what's going on now and you look at how people are struggling, what do you think about in relation to your novel?
Well, I think one of the things that's amazing right now is that so many women and kids are empowering and propelling this movement. So I think that one of the shackles that's being maybe thrown off temporarily, I hope permanently right now, is the idea that we have to wait for men to give us permission. I think that that ship is finally sailing. And, you know, I think the danger of that is sometimes, you know, if it's like the backlash against the women's movement, when men are pushed away, sometimes they come back with force and retaliate. So I hope that we can avoid that this time around by including men as well. I remember as a feminist, we tried to include men, and we had a few. We did have a few in the fight back in the 80s. But not the groundswell, not the, you know, the portrait that is, you know, spilling out onto the streets now is so many different kinds of people all working together, which is, you know, something of a first. But that was a big concern for me in my book. I was looking for examples from history. I was looking for examples from literature, you know, Paul Scott and The Jewel in the Crown and all of those kinds of books, and books that I was finding, nonfiction and fiction, about hostages that had been taken and what women do in response to family members being taken hostage, obviously looking at the border, at families that are ripped apart, and what was within the possibility for a mother to do. And precious little seemed to be the answer. Women do not generally have the tools to fight back. So in my case, I knew that I could not have her just stand idly by and be a passive observer waiting for somebody else to try and rescue her family. I had to give her the tools and create the situation where she would have an opportunity to jump in. And still, as a writer, I was kind of quaking as I did this. It's like, is anybody going to buy this? Is anybody going to believe that women, you know, a woman in this situation could actually pull this off? And the main thing that kept me going was looking at all of the female resistance fighters in Europe during World War II. And I mean, their courage and daring, and, you know, it knew no bounds. And that was what really kept me going. The fact that there's a special operations mission in my book that's very, very exotic in a way. It seems that way to me, but these missions happened all throughout Asia. So the combination that they really happened, and they were mostly men, if not entirely men, but in Europe, there were these women doing equally heroic acts. And so I just kind of brought those two ideas together. It is possible.
It is possible. So Donna, one of the things I thought about when I was reading your book is, I think most of us know at least one woman. I certainly know more than one woman who has had protracted battles to fight for custody of their children. And sometimes over an entire lifetime fighting for custody of the children with a much wealthier man, with a much wealthier ex-husband, and with a court system that just doesn't see this person who's poor as a good enough mother. And I think other women will think of that as well, because it seemed as though everything is against this woman once the man walks out of her life with this baby intact. Like, how is she ever going to do this? And obviously this is before we have the internet, and we can't just start searching somebody down. And so again, in your case too, we have a woman who she's not wealthy. She doesn't come from some wealthy family. It's not like she can just say, daddy, sugar daddy, help me find this man. She really has herself to depend on. And so if she wants that child, if she wants to see that child again, she's really dependent on her own self. And she could have just simply let the child go, clearly. And so you have her very much dependent on herself, and but she persists, as they say. She persists. So, what did you think about when you were giving her this kind of courage, and how do you see this kind of courage playing out in today's world?
Well, I'll start by saying that the idea for the story came from a conversation I heard on a radio show in Jamaica. And on Sunday evenings, there is a program called Sunday Contact, and people will call in to search for, family members, loved ones, people they have lost touch with. And so on one occasion when I was in Jamaica and I heard the program, a mother called in, and she was looking for her child, who at that point was about 8 years old. She knew the father had taken the child, but she didn't know where they were. And once I heard her story, I knew that that was what I wanted to do in this book. She was desperate, and she was looking for her child and going to any lengths at all possible to find her child. And there's so much, in a story like that. It's both a story. It could have been a story, because since she didn't know where the child had gone, one could have been a story of international abduction, depending on the father's circumstances. But there's so much that happens. But after I'd written the book, and what was happening here in America on the border with the government actually taking people's children, the story just felt a little bit different, because it was actually happening before our eyes, not just to one child, but to multiple children. And all of these parents were just simply unable to do anything to get their children back. So that's what I think about. And in the case of Tea by the Sea, it was the father, and she searched and searched and was able to find her child. But what we see happening here is that it's the government that's actually doing it. And not only is the government doing it, but some of these children have been adopted out into other families. And I don't know, how many of these parents will be able to find their children. One, there is also a language issue. And if you're coming from a different country and you have no idea what happens here, how to navigate the system, you are at even more of a disadvantage to finding your child. So that's what I think about. That's one of the things each time I keep reading this story and thinking about it, what I think about is what happens to those people who get to the end of their search and either give up completely or just never, ever find the child that was taken from them.
The world is a large place, and your mother, Plum, is never going to give up. You know that when you meet her in the story, that she is going to continue and continue. And of course, as you read in the piece, she has other children, but she's going to continue her search.
Right.
And one of the things that I find interesting too is that there is a piece in your story, and I hope I'm not giving too much away, when she is in the back of a police car. And it's interesting because my staff had read the book, and she's in the back of a police car. And when they first read this, they thought, okay, well, she's safe now. And when I first read it, I did not think she was safe. and I'm curious, when you wrote it, how you would have felt about Plum at that moment. I don't know if, have we lost you, Donna? Oh, no. Okay, we have you back.
Still frozen, I think.
I think Donna's frozen. Okay. Let's see if we get Donna back. Okay. Maybe I'll switch to you for a moment. Amy, we'll see if Donna comes back. So, Amy, one of the things I was wondering about, if you could discuss in terms of your novel, is the scene where the child disappears with the nanny
With
person,
Nyla, yeah.
with Nyla. Did you feel like at that point we were supposed to feel, this was my question for both of you, that he is safe at that point, or were we supposed to feel that he's not safe?
Oh, good heavens, no. No, he's loved, but there's a big difference between being loved and being safe. Okay, Donna, you're back. So I'll pick up later.
Okay.
Back to answer you.
So what I was asking you was, when I had first read the novel, and there's a scene where Plum is in a police car, I felt very anxious for her. And when my staff read that scene and she's in the back of a police car, I said to them, "How did you feel?" And they said, "Well, she's safe now." I said, "She's in the back of a police car." And so it was an interesting moment. We all kind of talked about it. But then afterwards, I realized that I wasn't sure how you, as the writer, were thinking about that scene. So I had a different reaction, I think partly because I taught at a university that's sort of on the Carson-Compton border for 25 years, or in that area I had been teaching for 25 years. And so to me, a person of color being in the back of a police car is never a good thing. And in light of everything that's now happened in the last few weeks, I feel even worse about it. But even when I first read it, I thought, this is not a good thing. So I felt like she was in danger in the back of the police car. But my staff didn't feel, they somehow thought now things were okay. So I'm now curious what you thought about that scene.
You know, well, certainly when I was writing it, I was not at all thinking about what we are seeing now.
Right.
And I didn't think of her as either in danger, and I didn't think of her as being safe.
Okay.
And I can't, if I say too much, I'll give away what happens.
Right.
But I think the key thing is what is happening outside of the car. That's what I was focused on. And I think if you look at it purely from that perspective, then I think it tells you, one, what is going to happen, and it gives her hope rather than, it's not about safety, it's more about hope. Right.
So she has hope because of what's happening outside of the car. But generally, being a person of color in a police car is generally not a good thing.
It's generally not a good thing, certainly, but I think the moment leading up to her being in a police car, I think, is the area that gave me a lot more heartache. You know, what exactly was going to happen there when the police showed up? Who was going to be taken away? It could have gone either way. And again, without giving away anything, the person who manages to save himself or herself is, you know, the one outside of the car. And I think it's more about power dynamics there than the police itself. Right.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're having a very interesting conversation now in this country about police dynamics and what needs to change in terms of policing in this country. And maybe it's mostly urban police in this country, although I'm not an expert on that, so I don't know. But it certainly seems as though Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Minneapolis have police have police forces that are badly in need of a shakeup. in terms of the way they administer the protect and serve clause. You know, I mean, it's clear. I mean, it was always clear to me when I was teaching at Cal State Dominguez that if you were a person of color and you saw the police, you were doing nothing at all walking down the street, you were desperately afraid. And that means that that protect and serve thing is not working at all in your community. So, Amy, I wanted you to respond. So you mentioned that the Japanese have come in, things have not gone well for the father, and the child and Nyla have disappeared into the forest. And there is a moment where it seems like, wow, the child is, quote, safe.
Yeah.
But how safe is that child? Talk to us a little bit about that idea of safety. I'm very interested how in each of your books you slide in and out of this idea of what it means to be safe for a moment. And in yours, it's like for a moment, the child is, quote, safe, but is he safe?
Well, there's always this tension between being, you know, physically safe and emotionally protected. And that's really critical, I think, in my story with Ty, because he's such an emotionally strange child. He's a very unusual, he's very, very bright, but he doesn't communicate with the outer world, and he's not really, he doesn't connect with his mother. He doesn't really connect with his father. There's only one person on the planet initially that he really connects with, and that's Nyla. So she's the person who creates emotional protection, emotional safety for him. But his parents, of course, give him the physical safety. He needs that larger world. And so when he goes off into the forest, you know, Nyla initially gives him the emotional protection, but she's only a young teenager. She can't provide the physical safety, but they join a community, the Bia people in the forest, who are better equipped to keep him safe physically. But that said, I mean, he's a little white kid who's never spent any time in the forest, and the forest is filled with all kinds of dangerous situations, and they know how to navigate it, and he doesn't. So, you know, so then you have Nyla trying to kind of run interference and keep him physically safe from situations that he doesn't understand, that she doesn't understand either. And it gets that whole issue of safety and emotional attachment gets, you know, kind of runs around on a carousel a bit throughout the story. And yeah, I mean, I think that issue of safety is crucial. And, you know, later in the story, you know, certain members of the cast do become physically safe again, but then that emotional protection, that emotional connection, that emotional safety is still very much in doubt and question. So you have to have both to be a whole, sane human being, really, I think.
Right.
You know.
Well, Donna, one of the things you talked about, I think the last time we were talking about your book, that I think I had kind of forgotten about until you mentioned it, was that the dad who runs off with the child had this deep emotional connection with Plum. And part of the reason that she's so sort of confused by him taking off with the child is that she thought that they had a soul connection. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't understand why he would do this, because she thought they were connected, not just like they were lovers, or not just like, you know, we're together as a couple, but she thought that their soul was connected, their souls were connected. And so she thought that they were emotionally, he was her emotional balance. And so she's left adrift in some way, when he's gone, and she's trying to kind of figure things out on her own. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Plump's search is twofold. One, she certainly wants to find her child, but she wants to understand why Lenworth took off. And what is also tied up in her search and the way she feels is just this whole feeling of abandonment. And so as a child, because she got into some trouble in Brooklyn, her parents sent her off to Jamaica to finish school so that she would stay out of trouble. She ended up meeting Lenworth, getting into a little bit more trouble than they expected, but she did not look at their sending her off in the same way that her parents did. She thought they abandoned her. And so when Lenworth takes off with her child, she again feels that same sense of abandonment. And it's just a difficult thing for her to go through those early years of her life, thinking that she wasn't worth enough to one, her parents, or to Lenworth. And it just clouds her search, clouds how she thinks about herself, how she sees herself.
So she feels abandoned twice, in fact.
Right.
And those of us who have abandonment issues, we take things hard. Especially when it happens the second time.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. And when you're there on an island without your parents, and at that point, her parents weren't ready for her to come back. They had decided she was going to stay in Jamaica and continue with the life that she had already set in motion there with Lenworth. So she really didn't know where she was going, what she was turning, or who she was turning towards. And the one person she expected to be there for her is the one who takes off.
Right. With this baby.
With the baby, right.
Which she hasn't even quite been able to develop a bond with, but but she's now going to go and figure out where the baby is gone. And I think that obviously in Amy, in your story, there is also an incomplete bond. But Claire is going to go find her child, and that bond is formed later. But I like that in both of these cases, this bond is kind of incomplete, but these mothers go anyway.
It's really amazing. Donna and I have had several conversations like this, and in the middle of one, it occurred to me that we both are telling the same story in the sense that we have men who kind of are creatures of patriarchal kind of post-colonial mindset who they take the agency away from the mothers and they separate these families for the good of the families, for the good of the mother, for the good of the child. They take the agency away from the women. And it was kind of an amazing penny that dropped when I realized Donna was talking, and I thought, wait a minute, she's describing my story. The books are so completely different. The contexts are so different, but that core familial struggle and the post-colonial patriarchal aspects of it are definitely the same in both books. And that issue of agency is critical, I think, in both of our stories. And these are women who, it's abandonment, but it's also being stripped of any agency. I had an interesting conversation with some people about my book the other day. And in the beginning of my story, Shep, the husband, forces his wife, Claire, onto the boat. When they realize that the child is missing, that Ty is missing, and they realize that they are not going to be able to find him in time for them all to get on the ship, Shep drugs his wife and forces her on the boat to keep her safe. And to me, that was such a normal thing for a desperate, loving husband to do in that situation, especially a man of his era. who, you know, thinks he's responsible for the safety of this person. And, you know, she's not going to go willingly, but she has to go. You know, he
Right.
knows, he doesn't know for sure that the Japanese are going to take over, but there's a pretty good chance they're going to get there. And, you know, he can't afford to have her stay back as well. And so it always seemed to make sense to me that this is what he would do. That's what this character would do. But I'm dealing with readers all the time who can never forgive him. They can't forgive him for forcing her onto that boat, you know?
Yeah.
And it's really interesting. I mean, I think that's what we impose on, you know, historical characters sometimes when we're reading it in the context of a different era. But
Well, I mean, I think in a way this embodies what drove second wave feminism. Like, you either will have a baby whether you want one or not, you know. Your body is, we have power over your body, right? So you know, it's funny, my ex and I always talk about the fact that both of our mothers didn't want children at all, but, you know, abortion wasn't legal. That's why we got to be born. So that generation of women had to have children whether they wanted to or not, and then had to stay home with those children even if they wanted to do something else. And so they miserably stayed home with the children for a bit. But yeah, I mean, that era was very prescriptive where women were concerned in terms of what they were supposed to do and who they were supposed to do and what they were supposed to do with their bodies. Very, very much it was up to the man. I'm trying to figure out how to do this Q&A thing and see if anybody has a question. Let's see. Looks like there's a question here for
I think it's for Donna.
Donna, yes. Donna, do you see this question down here? Do you want me to read it to you? Do you have any information on Dr. Beryl Loftman Bailey as a linguist from Jamaica? There's not enough information. I'm working on a project. Maybe this is a kind of a weird personal question. I don't know. Do you know who Dr. Bailey is? No? No. Okay. Do we have any other questions anybody wants to throw up there? Otherwise, I will just keep asking questions. You guys know how I am. If anybody who is watching has other questions to throw up there, please do, and I will go ahead and ask them of our writers here. My next question of both of you, was, I'm just going to throw this out there because I've been wanting to ask this one of you guys. During the coronavirus, have you guys been working on a new book? Have you been doing any writing? Are you thinking about a new book?
I haven't been doing any writing, or not much writing. I've been able to finish some, you know, like short essays that I've been working on, but anything of any length, even just simply sitting down to read a book, just simply hasn't happened. I'm hoping that now that we're shifting into the summer and things are changing a little bit, that I may actually find some way out of that kind of mindset where I just couldn't get anything done. But I mean, I have other projects that I had been working on that I just can't really do anything with it.
Yeah, I admit I had a brain freeze starting March 15th myself. I wrote a few articles, but I could not get started on any big project. I've written a few poems, that's about it. Not about the coronavirus, so fortunately. So I hear you completely, Donna. I thought I was going to start a coronavirus novel, but my brain is frozen. And then once the Black Lives Matter thing started, I became so engaged and so excited about wanting to do things about that I really couldn't think about starting any big projects. But you, Amy?
I have a book, you know, that has been on and off for years. It's a memoir about my father and my relationship with my father that is awaiting final revision probably, but I'm like the rest of you. I've been working on short essays and pitches and just trying to find readers for this book and doing these events and teaching my students, and I don't know, the time just seems to evaporate without leaving the house. It's just, I don't know, there aren't enough hours in the day for all this stuff. I don't know how anybody, I'm like you, I haven't been able to read a book even, really, except, you know, a few minutes here and there at bedtime, but it's just way too much going on, which is so crazy without leaving the house.
Yeah, it's weird how it burns through your energy being home. So it looks like we have another question, and that is, do both of you, I guess, in other writing that you do, you both have other books out. Do you write about mother-child relationships in your other writing? Is this a big theme for you, in other words? Donna?
You go first.
Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Oh, it's in most of my books, but it's been more in the background of the others. My last novel, Flash House, had kind of a similar, actually it had a similar triangle with a mother and a young Indian girl and the mother's son, who is, you know, not as young as Ty, but young-ish and younger than the Indian girl. But in that case, the mother's take is totally different. She's obsessed. In that story, the husband disappears. And so she's fixated on finding her husband, and she ends up sending her son away because he can't handle going with her to search for her husband. So she's a much less likable character, I think, than Claire is in this story. But she's an interesting story, and she's kind of a portrait of obsessive compulsive behavior.
Hopefully that's not based on anyone you know.
No, certainly
not. Donna, have you written about mother-child relationships?
I do, and for some reason, I guess it seems as if it's the one thing that I keep writing about over and over. So my first novel is River Woman, and it's a story about a young mother whose child drowns, and also a story about how the mother and the community deal with the death of the child. But what another central issue in that story is the fact that the mother of the child who's died had been left behind in Jamaica by her mother. Her mother migrated when she was, if I'm remembering correctly, about 5 years old, 3 or 5 years old. And her mother lives in New York. And, you know, each year she says, soon I'll come soon I'll come to take you to live with me. So it really is more of a story about how that child and her mother really get along. What, you know, when her mother comes back to Jamaica, what does she find? And she finds a young woman who is not at all what she had expected. And so, and of course, with Tea by the Sea, it's a different story. It's a different search. It's a search, but again, it's a story about a mother trying to have a connection with an absent daughter. And I'm sure that, no, I was going to say, I'm sure that the other books that I'm working on have something similar in them.
Kate, there's another question in the chat. It's a good final question if we're starting to wrap up.
See if I can find that. What would you want readers to take away from reading your book, specifically on decolonization and decolonizing? Amy.
Well, it's a little bit, it's not specific to decolonization and decolonizing, except that it is the undercurrent that makes colonialization possible. So it's probably, in my mind, key to decolonizing. And it's certainly key to helping to fix and resolve a lot of the issues that are front and center right now in Black Lives Matter and depolicing and also our political situation. It's a line from a secondary character in my book toward the end, and he says, "The most difficult thing is to remember that the enemy is human but this is also the most important, especially when I find myself being my own worst enemy. So that I've been asked what's the one thing I would want people to take away from this book, and I would say that that idea is the central idea throughout the whole book. It's what the whole issue of attunement is about. It's what the language, the multicultural, it's all about the struggle to view everyone around you as a human, even if they are your enemies. And it's also about the struggle to remember humanity when you are treating yourself in a dehumanizing way. And sometimes the reason we treat other people as less than human is because we can't see ourselves for our own humanity. So I think that for me, that's the most important thing.
Donna?
I think for me, it's the whole idea of agency. And I think when you look at, when you look back at colonialism, you look back at the idea that a group of people will come in or have come in and are making decisions for everybody, or determining how you speak, what you eat, what you wear, how you live your entire lives. And by doing that, what you're also doing is erasing what these people had, their entire culture, everything that has made that group who they are. And so in Tea by the Sea, what you see happening is that Lenworth has made a decision for Plum and a decision for Opal. And by doing that, he has erased and just really turned their lives upside down. So there are slight differences, certainly, in the way in which we see agency play out in both cases. But I think it's just the overarching idea that we have to let individual people and communities and cultures, whoever it is, wherever they are, make decisions for themselves. And I don't know that there's any one group that has that right or should have that right to step in and do it for them.
I think, I'm sure both of you read Jamaica Kincaid's Girl when you were growing up. And for me, that story and Annie John always created a sort of line for me between how motherhood was a sort of colonization, because as you just said, Donna, somebody is making all the decisions for you, what you eat, what you drink, how you think, what you wear, all those decisions. And of course, in her stories, the mother is way overarching, making all those decisions for the young girl, when to play with marbles and all those kinds of things, and what marbles you could play with and where to play with the marbles and all this sort of thing. And of course that is, and she's obviously writing about colonization as well in a particular way. And I think that that's why motherhood is such a great metaphor for colonization in both of your stories and for all of us at this time. So may we all think for ourselves in this country and in our future stories and in our future lives. As someone who grew up in a cult and has written about it, so I didn't get to think for myself until I was 18. I am all for all of us thinking for ourselves, writing for ourselves, and writing our own stories. I hope everyone that is watching this will run right out and buy Glorious Boy and Tea by the Sea. I can see that in the chat, you guys can get a discount for buying these amazing books. And thank you all very much for watching and sharing this afternoon if you're on the West Coast, this evening if you're on the East Coast, and being here with us. This has been such a great conversation. Greenlight Bookstore.
Yeah, thank you all, Kate and Donna and Amy, for tonight's extraordinary conversation. And thank you to our audience for holding space for tonight's conversation and these books, these wonderful books. As Kate said, you can buy both Tea by the Sea and Glorious Boy through greenlightbookstore.com and plenty of other wonderful Red Hen books that we love. You can get 15% off of tonight's featured books within the next week if you buy them online through Greenlight with code Red Hen. And you can also find that info in the chat. And also a reminder that tonight's event has been recorded. So if you had to miss any part of it, you have friends, family, colleagues who missed it, who wanted to see it, keep an eye out for the full event recording on our website and YouTube later on. Thanks again, everyone, for coming and spending your evening with us tonight, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Chelsea,
Thank you
and
so much.
Greenlight, and Kate and Donna.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.